Hello, everybody. Welcome to our lecture today. Today we are honored to have Mr. Chris from OMA, who is also the partner of OMA in charge of the Asian projects. So today he will give us a lecture about light and heaviness in architecture. And we are also glad to have our three critique guests from three different regions in China. We have Mr. Qingyun Ma, who is the founder of Madas Ban and also the dean of the School of Architecture of University of Southern California. I think, yeah, we all know him. And he is also the lead guest who will introduce Chris and his project. We also have Mr.史洋from CAFA. He's also the leader of and founder of HyperSity, also a registered architect in Netherlands. Also, he worked in OMA, and he's from Beijing. We also have Mr. Zetao Chen Tao. He is from Shenzhen. He is the founder of FCHA, which is 坊城建筑. He is also very experienced architect. So I would welcome everybody to our lecture and thank you very much for attending today. And I am Ray Wang. I'm also a registered architect in Netherlands, Chinese. I'm very glad to host this lecture today. Maybe shortly in Chinese. 今天我们这个讲座是英文的，然后也非常欢迎大家来倾听和参与这个讲座。那所有的讲座内容呢都是线上直播的，所以观众们可以去留言提问，我们将收集大家的提问，然后在 Chris 的讲座结束之后，我们会把这些问题来跟 Chris 提出，希望他能够有时间来回答我们所有的问题。So I will leave it to Mr. Ma now to give a short intro of our lecture. Thanks.
Hello. Hello. My name is Qingyun Ma. Besides the fact that the host has introduced me I'm also a friend, a longtime friend of OMA and many partners like Chris Van Dijk today. In introducing the work that presented here, I wanted to address 3 points. One is the time when Chris Van Dijk joined OMA. That's about mid and late 90s. That's when OMA's critical posture in architectural practice has also exhibited a very deep engagement in the changing societies worldwide. That's the year when Great Leap Forward book was actually being conducted in the Delta, Pearl River Delta area. And after Chris has joined the OMA practice, he has quickly become the leader of many transformative projects that actually transformed the office from the period before the mid-90s and all the way to today. Projects like Universal Studio in LA, Prada Shop in New York, Los Angeles, and Casa Musica in Porto. Those are projects that actually highly diversified OMA's engagement in different cities and culture, but also has again exhibited a new level of finishedness and the tectonic and engineering challenges in all of them, which again has been enhanced by small but very difficult, challenging projects that Chris has led For example, the Prada Transformer in Seoul and the Hanwha Galleria department store in Seoul, but also in France, Bibliothèque Alice and the foundation, Prada Foundation in Milan. And again, those projects are in a way very open-ended, but also deep, engaged in the urban sites and cultures that taking into the flow and the energy of the projects. Many of the paradigm that's been developed in this area has continued on and bring them to many huge projects. Most of them, almost all of them, have played a role of transform a large urban setting and the region around it. Particularly, like I have noticed, there are projects in Shenzhen, the stock exchange building in a very prominent site. Nonetheless, a very unique spatial construct and urban gesture, and also the another very notable projects in Hangzhou, which is much a softer urban tissue and a much more sophisticated urban environment. But the project same in the same way. What I'm here referring to is the Hangzhou Prism, has a very strong, unmistakably interaction with the city. But in the same time, the uncompromised monumentality and technical achievements has again kind of put OMA's work continuously on the forefront of global practice and continued the legacy and heritage of the office has built and led by Chris van Dijk, continue on. I'm again very honored to be part of the lecture. I haven't been in lecture for I don't know how long, forever, but again, in a virtual method, but in a very serious topic like Chris have proposed. I will follow on the lecture and prepare more notes in interaction with other panelists and audience. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I will leave it to the other members of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are also very honored to have you here today. And then to give more time to Chris, we would just start the presentation and welcome Mr. Chris, and then please just share your screen and we will follow your project.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for the invite. First of all, it's a great opportunity to, although not physically, but to at least be virtually, let's say, back and engaged with a very broad audience in China. While I'm going to share my screen, thank you also for the introduction, Sion. It's slightly intimidating to have so many compliments thrown at me before starting the lecture. So I better make it happen now. So this was my first slides. What I try to do in the next 40 minutes is explain on the number of projects, both in China, but also outside China. How we, let's say, work with light, because that was the title of the lecture I was asked to do. And that's quite difficult because actually every project you can almost explain also from the perspective of how light is used. I call this lecture therefore heavy light. First of all, because, oh, sorry, this is too fast. First of all, because the interesting thing about the word light is that in many languages, whether it's in English or in Chinese or in Dutch, it has many different meanings. And it can be about illumination, it can be about lightness. Usually it's something kind of positive, something great. And that means also that in architecture, we can find associations with these different meanings about lights. And when we talk about lights, there is no way around to discuss also the heavy or the heaviness, basically the kind of yin and yang, because when you can only create lights when shaping the heaviness, shaping the masses. And in this lecture, I have selected a number of projects that deal with it more on a kind of architectural or let's say volumetric level, but also on the scale of the detail, the material, and the treatments of the surface. So I'll switch basically between these different scales, and I'll do that with a number of projects that I think represent this best and that are relatively recent. So yeah, this is the image that was also used for the poster of this lecture. It's about Axel Springer. It's a very recent project. We opened it during COVID. And what is important to understand about this project is a little bit the context. The project is located in the center of Berlin, and it's actually located right on the spot where the wall between East and West Berlin used to be. And that space, here you can see it in plan. The green line was where the wall was. And for many years, this was basically a void separating the two halves in Berlin. But what has happened after the reunification is that Berlin was gradually filling up this void, in that way almost erasing its history. And what we think is interesting is, and this is that void, here you see basically the wall area and let's say the original building of our client, the actually headquarters, and our new site is here, right in the center of this walled area. And while we were basically asked to also fill the gap, and in that sense fill the void, which is part of the history of Berlin, we at the same time try to let's say create a new void, and not a void of history, but kind of the void of the future Berlin as the European capital of startups. This is an image that kind of relates to this traditional image of our client, of Springer. And this was the kind of the traditional kind of office culture of this media company, which Springer was, which is a series of traditional journalists writing, typing for the newspaper, smoking cigarettes. And that is what this kind of very, let's say, traditional company has been for a long time in Berlin. However, the company was in this transition period from paper press company to a new media company. And that meant that their company was suddenly confronted with a whole new generation of people that were infiltrating the company. And that's this kind of people, young people, that also need a very different environment to work in. Environment that is not based on little cell offices and boardrooms, but a working environment that is about creativity, that is social, that is inspiring, and that is flexible. So the needs and the let's say the ideal scenario environments are radically different from what the traditional Springer company was able to offer. So the quest was really about developing an environment for this transition, where there is a balance between the old Springer, still based on the kind of more traditional values, and also with sufficient room for this new generation of journalists and media makers and tech people that were joining this company. So what we did is very literally trying to kind of create this void at this spot where the wall was, and create this void for these startup people. And we created here this kind of valley, like Silicon Valley, basically a valley, and we doubled it. It's two valleys on top of each other. And by doing that, we created this kind of open void, and a void that is kind of in relation with this former headquarter, that is kind of on the other side. So what you see here is the relation between the kind of headquarter, the traditional headquarter, and the new headquarter for these two companies and how they relate to each other. The massing that is kind of generated with this diagonal axis, which is running through the building, is such a way also that it always relates to different parts in the city. So it also addresses or kind of it relates to the surrounding streets very strongly. And in this company, there's not in this office is not a single company, but a series of smaller startups or entities that are part of this Springer group, different types of media. But what they have in common is that they all work in this central space. So this becomes the kind of social collective workspace for everybody in working in this building. And that means that all these companies that are in this building basically enjoy two conditions. On the one hand, they do have the possibility for traditional offices, which is in red, but all of these entities stick into this central atrium space. And that means that they do have the possibility to connect and to relate, and they have the possibility to have their traditional workspaces. And that boundary between the two is flexible. That is up to them to decide how much of each. Then you can also consider the project basically as 4 fragments. So you have the upper half and the lower half of the valley, and you have the east and the west side. One side is facing the former East Berlin, the other one is the West Berlin. And that means that all these 4 quadrants also are slightly different and can be used also for the different type of entities that are within the Springer group. All of these fragments, however, are then again connected by this single news bridge, which is a collective newsroom that is shared with both the newspaper, but also with the television company. This is, let's say, in the model, you can see how large the atrium is, and that it's based on all these little terraces that are kind of sticking into the atrium space. And those terraces were also very important in order to make this project work, because it's an extremely deep block, very deep floor plates. And what we did with this atrium, of course, is to kind of bring light in from all sides. We have the 2 kind of large openings, but we also have openings in the roof, and we have additional atrium. So this atrium is not only a social space, but it's also a space, of course, to create enough daylight in these very deep floor plates in order to comply to the German regulations for workspaces. So this is a model shot of how these different halves, this is the west and this is the east, how they kind of come together and how they are able to communicate. And this is the space today. The images show here again the west side. The west is all in green flooring, and this is the east side. And in the center here, you have the news bridge that is connecting the two. I must say that the images I'm showing today are taken all during the COVID period. So the building was still relatively empty. To express this concept of these two opposites, so this kind of mass that relates to the kind of more traditional Berlin and that very open atrium space that relates much more to the new energy of these startup companies, these tech companies that form this new center within Springer. We also wanted to express that, of course, in the facade concept. So we have two main facades in this project. One is the facade of the main mass, and the other facade is the atrium facade. And the kind of relation between these two, of course, emphasizes also the relation between the kind of traditional and the kind of new Springer. For the main mass, we selected black glass, and this is an example we found. Black glass, this is a tower in Vienna from Perrault. And the interesting thing of black glass is that it obviously looks very solid, feels very heavy, while from the inside it still kind of lets in all the daylight without changing the color of the light. And that is because in Berlin, there is a tradition of very monumental, very heavy looking buildings. Most buildings are stone facades with small windows. And there is also this kind of maximum height, which we all had to relate to. So our project actually consists out of two blocks, each that relates to a traditional Berlin block. It has that kind of heavy looking, serious looking quality. At the same time, we wanted this building, of course, also to be contemporary. Therefore, it's all glass, enough daylight is coming in. But we wanted to give the glass also a tactile quality and give it a quality, a kind of a softness that kind of breaks away and that goes against the monumentality that is there at the same time. It's a bit of a paradox. For that, we were inspired by this very famous collage by Mies van der Rohe, which is a charcoal drawing of the first glass building in Berlin that he designed before the Second World War. This was not built, but this was one of those kind of important moments in the history of Berlin as a kind of the Berlin of the future. So we taken this image, this charcoal painting or drawing of him, and we projected it on the facade. And in that way, we found a balance between, on the one hand, heaviness and seriousness, and at the same time, something soft, something you want to touch. We did many tests on site. This is the black glass with the silk screen. And of course, the challenge was for us to convince the client that it has a strong appearance to the outside. But from the inside, it was nearly not visible. So this is that mock-up where you see the prints on the outside, still visible depending on how the sunlight hits the facade. But while being in there, you barely notice the image of this silk screen. So this is then when the facade is on. So you see it's the black glass, but at the same time, this kind of very soft charcoal drawing makes this facade feel very soft, something that you kind of want to touch. So that's the, let's say, typical office facade. The other facade is the facade towards the atrium. And in the competition, we have never developed that concept for that facade. We always showed this as an outdoor space, almost, as a series of terraces without any boundary between inside and outside. So only after the competition, we really had to start developing and thinking about how to develop this facade. What was important is that it would be the complete contrast to this very serious looking dark floating blocks of black glass here. And that it would also broadcast the energy that is inside these new workspaces. So as the atrium was about 30 meters tall, we also wanted to avoid that we would have extreme thick facade structural members behind the glass that would also take away a lot of the transparency. So with Arab, we developed this idea of this air crate, making the glass facade a three-dimensional structure that would reduce the amount of steel. And this was basically the image that we had. So it has very relatively thin steel members. And in that way, we created kind of a net that is three-dimensional, therefore structurally performing and as transparent as possible. And at the same time, this three-dimensionality also kind of shows this energy that is inside the building. And because these facets are turned around, there is always moments of complete transparency against the reflection. So in that sense, there is always part of the glass facade that allow you to kind of look into this building. And this is then how the relation between the new Springer building and the old Springer building basically come together, tradition versus new. That atrium is not only facing the existing headquarters, but it's also facing its surroundings, facing this kind of main street, which is also called the Axel Springer Street. So also everybody in Berlin will be looking at the energy that is inside this building. So this is the atrium seen from the bridge, and here you see these kind of different terraces below, and also these different terraces in the upper part that all view down into the same space. And these are all different entities that have their own space on these terraces. And all these spaces are workspaces. So they are not breakout spaces or coffee drink spaces, but they're all, let's say, rentable office space. This is a look to the other direction. So this is that news bridge that you just saw. So in there is the newsroom for the television company and a newspaper. And there's also television studios connected to that. And this is when you look down, you see how they are used differently. We can have the traditional work sessions. We can have the informal meeting rooms. We developed a whole series of furniture for both informal use and also for the different working conditions. And you're bathing in sunlight. I think one of the most interesting things, and you cannot show this, of course, in slides, also is that the acoustics is very good. We developed this on the basis of wanting to create a workspace as if you're sitting outside, say in good weather, enjoying the sunlight, but without this kind of echo that you would typically expect in a large atrium space. So it's extremely comfortable. And actually, the companies that are working in this building using these terrace spaces more than the traditional workspaces behind. As is considered an outdoor space almost in the way we treat it, our solutions to deal with, let's say, too much sunlight or also with the, let's say, reflection on the screen, we developed a series of elements like this umbrella to kind of help the people to kind of organize the workspace in the best possible way. Now I want to switch to a different topology, which is about cultural buildings or buildings with a public orientation. This is a very old project in Porto. It's called Casa de Música, and it's a music performance center. We've perceived this as a fully opaque box initially. One monolith, which is placed on a square in the city. And what we then did is we took out, excavated from it, a single space, which is the kind of main auditorium, which is this shoebox, very rectangular plan, which is ideal for, let's say, controlling the acoustics of a music hall. And this is the only space that cuts basically through either sides of the volume, meaning that it brings in daylight from two sides. Then in addition, we added a few more elements, public spaces that we kind of excavated, and they all link with the exterior, but they also intersect with the central space in the middle. So these are the smaller auditoriums and other VIP rooms, for instance. So that's the concept. It's a concept about the monolith and then making some moments for daylight to come in. And then the space in between these volumes and this envelope, that is full with all the back of house, all the circulation, everything you need, basically the machinery of this performance center. But our focus is this main auditorium space. So in principle, it's a rectangular floor plan You can see here the orchestra playing and the audience. And then on the sides, on all the surfaces, we have added elements that would then improve or kind of control the acoustic quality of the space. And as I said, on two sides, we have these kind of windows that allow daylight in, which is quite unique for music performance spaces, that on two sides, daylight is coming in. And of course, that makes the space way more dynamic and way more lively. However, it can also be controlled, of course, with a number of curtains. The acoustics, as I said, in the space are controlled by these different, let's say, exceptions, balconies, control rooms, but also by these windows that relate between this kind of smaller public spaces and this single space. And you can see it's glass and it's corrugated. And the corrugation relates again to the frequency level that needs to balance out. So these different spaces have different curvatures. Here there is a zoom in, and it shows also how the relation between these rooms work. Because it's glass, you can say see through, but there is no disruption in the sense that people will be distracted during a play. On the two large windows, we also have this kind of corrugated glass, as you can see here. Also there, the corrugation is designed for the acoustical performance. And because there was a need, of course, for acoustical insulation to the exterior, we have used the buffer space as part of the foyer, as the lobby space. And this is where you see one of those big windows. What you can also see is that we have only two vertical lines and we have no vertical mullions, because the corrugation is also a way to reinforce the glass panel. And by doing so, we don't need any mullions. So therefore, the transparency of this facade is much, much greater than when you would have these traditional kind of mullions. And here, this is the small exhibition space. And the nice thing, of course, in the evening is that when you pass by, you kind of see the event more or less happening. You more or less can imagine the music that is being played. So the relation between cultural program inside the building and the city becomes very, very strong. I'm going to switch to the next project. That's this project. It's the theaters in Taipei. Recently opened. And the interesting thing, that's why I combined these two, is that they use more or less the same material concepts. However, the way they are applied is entirely different. It's basically opposite. In short, the theater consists of three autonomous theater rooms that are located back to back here inside the central cube. That means that three theaters can operate independently, but they can also operate as a single theater. What we found very interesting is to again create a relation between the performance space and the city, but this time we have located then the seated areas outside the box, so that, let's say, it becomes part of the public realm. You can almost imagine yourself sitting inside that space. Different than Porto is also that therefore the machinery of the theaters are actually condensed into a single volume, which then forms the center. And that is inside here, this kind of glass block. The theater rooms are all clad in aluminum. This is a glimpse of some of the performance spaces. Inside, this is the blue box. And from the blue box here, you can see the Grand Theater through these back of house rooms when they're all opened. So as I said, we have these three very iconic seated spaces plugged into this central glass cube. And that becomes the center. And that glass cube is an elevated cube, so it's lifted off the public space. and from there you can take a route into the building and enter the lobby, go to your theater space, but there's also a number of public areas like a cafe and a roof terrace that you can go to while taking this route through the building. And all of it is wrapped in this glass skin. And I think what is interesting is that although it's similar than Porto, in Porto the glass was is designed as a filter, as a screen between interior and exterior. It kind of filters away the noise. It kind of filters the view. While here it creates a kind of a volumetric substance instead. So it's not anymore a screen or a skin, but it becomes really a volume, but a volume with a softness, with a kind of tactile quality. This is when you arrive to the theater. There is the central square, and here you see the glass cube, which is kind of lifted off the ground. So as a visitor, you kind of just enter by simply going underneath, and then you can, from this moment, go up. Inside the lobby space, you can look down again to the square, which is here, and then take your way up either to one of the theaters, or you pass through the building and visit some of the public programs. While doing so, you will not only see, let's say, front of house spaces, but you also enjoy views into these usually hidden spaces, which are, for instance, the back of house spaces, inside the theaters, or the rehearsal spaces. So that's all part of this kind of tour. There is this possibility to enjoy dinner here in the cafe while enjoying the backdrop of the landscape here around Taipei. And there's always these kind of nice moments where you enjoy how the glass facade combines these or meets the facades of the seated areas. Until you finally arrive at the rooftop terrace right here. So in the evening, of course, when the theaters are open, all these different programs, the event spaces, the public circulation, and the back of house spaces, they appear with different lighting colors to the outside. So suddenly it becomes again this kind of very energetic box that ties together these three different theater rooms. So from the kind of corrugated glass in TPEC, I wanted to show this other project, which is our smallest project in China to date. It's the, let's say, redesign of the entrance of the UCCA in Beijing. And the UCCA has been located in these two central factory halls for, I think, more than 15 years by now. And they were extending their spaces with this building here at the front, this slab from the 1970s. The situation for UCCA when we arrived was that it had a huge space, but it was nearly invisible from the sidewalks surrounding public spaces. It was a very small entrance loophole right here, and that was it. So all we needed to do, and this was the old condition, is to demolish parts in order to basically bring back the original structure. In other words, it was all about opening up, so that our intention was that people passing by on the street would actually immediately get glimpses into the exhibition spaces and make a kind of maximum connectivity between the museum and the outdoor space. So we propose to completely remove the facades on the ground floor, take away all the clutter and walls, so that the sidewalk would gradually transform into interior space. And in this zone under the red building, we would have some entrance facilities for the museum. So the own design challenge, really, apart from cleaning up, was to design this physical barrier between the outside and the inside. The idea was actually to design a curtain. because a curtain is something that you kind of feel you can always just enter. It doesn't matter where you are. And we therefore thought of this glass facade not as a facade that was invisible, but that was actually very visible. A kind of a glass facade that you kind of want to touch, that you almost want to enter and go into. So we designed this glass facade as a curtain, meaning that each and every panel is completely unique. There is no repetitive pattern in here. Every wrinkle in the glass is different than the other panel. And that way it would be a very informal, a seamless connection between inside and outside. However, we only had 6 months for design and construction, so that is very fast. So we had to somehow create a plan for this. In principle, we have 4 different panel types, which require different, let's say, technology. A, B, C, and D, and that has to do more with the kind of way of curvature. So these are the 4. They were either wrapping around the column, they were very 3D, or they had wrinkles inside. This is the main entrance. We basically recessed the glass facade. This is a diagonal line, and make it cross with this auditorium space, which is both inside and outside, to create this covered exterior space. And this is how that flat glass line cuts right through the auditorium. And this is below that auditorium. So you see that outline is orthogonal with the streets, and this is that diagonal. So the glass here curves in 3 directions. It's a fully warped surface. So it's this panel. The glass almost feels fluid. And from here, we have a series of wrinkled panels that are all, as I said, completely bespoke. And we didn't design these wrinkles. They were more or less created by gravity. So we orchestrated them. We didn't design them exactly. And this is how we folded the glass then in the other direction. So it goes around the column or inside the column. And then there's a series of curvatures which are irregular. So looking up, you see this. And that on the one hand, we wanted to kind of have a kind of unique, uncontrolled glass facade. On the other side, the facade still needed to perform. So like with Porto, the corrugation actually provides rigidity in the glass. And with this rigidity, we would not need to have any emulsions. So there were still parameters that we needed to control together with our advisors, VSA, and with North Glass, who was the producer of these panels. And as there was no time for advanced big molds, we had to do a very low-tech hot bending technique with very simple molds. But the advantage of simple molds is that you can also make many of them for very little money. So actually each of them we could therefore make a bespoke and different. And as we couldn't control 100% the geometry, but basically let it go by gravity, we first needed to make the glass panels before then making the transoms. So only after the glass panel was finished, we could trace the edge. And here you can see the stainless steel transom that holds the glass in place. And this is the facade by night. The last project I wanted to present to you today is a project in Hangzhou. It's called Prism, and it's still under construction. Here you see the rendering that we made a long time ago. And this is the project, I think a month ago or 2 months ago. You see it's coming up quite fast now. The facade is almost finished. It's a project, it's a mixed-use project. It's with a lot of housing. And actually, by master plan was calling for 2 towers. And instead of 2 towers, we kind of put them together, created 1 block. And then we shaved off 2 sides. And after shaving them off, we added terraces here. And we also created this kind of outdoor atrium space. So this is exterior space that continues through the building. And the reason why we wanted to do it, because we wanted to develop a typology that where architecture and landscape inside an outdoor space would really engage and provide a lot of different community spaces. There's a lot of young professionals working here in this future tech city for Alibaba or one of the other big tech giants. And we felt if you put them all in the tower, in their little apartments, they would all become very isolated. So we wanted to create a building that forms almost like a small village, a community on itself. And therefore that relation between inside and outside and having different degrees of exteriorness is something that we found interesting. As you can see, it's mixed. There's some commercial space, there is some offices, there is a residential program, and there is a hotel in it. And what of course is nice is that by adding these two slopes, 50% of all units actually have a very nice outdoor terrace. This is a terrace, and this is kind of the double height loft space. From the exterior, we were obliged to follow a very rigid material palette. So it had to look like the surrounding office buildings. So aluminum and blue glass were given. But as the building is porous, we are able to create a different environment in the atrium space. So again, the intention is to kind of bring in outdoor into the atrium, bring in the Shishi landscape features, green and water features, into the center of the building, which is then the kind of lobby for all users. And when looking up, you see some of those circulation spaces, public balconies, and also this kind of bridge that it will include amenities for the users and for the hotel. This is a view a few months ago. So you see it already gets its final shape. And this is a view looking, let's say, to the outside, again with this hotel bridge. And this is a view from a few weeks ago. So you can see also those inclined surfaces that will help to reflect light in are also already progressing. And this is my last image. This is the view of the Hangzhou Prism within the core of the CBD of the future tech city. This is the end of my lecture, and I'm happy to answer any question for you.